Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf Live. Yes, for another live session here. I'm going to be talking about Harley Davidson's with the M8 engines in particular, and this vented transmission cover that a lot of people are discussing now, and they're wondering, is it really worth it? So basically, this is a transmission cover plate, which is a company called Trask Performance. They've developed it, and it covers over the transmission housing, but there's also a compartment opening for the engine. So there is a breather tube, if you will, that comes from the crankcase, and then that also there's another hole which goes to the engine oil reservoir, as it were. So this cover is a sealed cover for that component, that compartment, and then there is a relief valve in there that vents the atmosphere, or vents to some kind of tubing with some kind of oil filter on the end. So Richard, hello, thank you for joining. Loving these live streams. Well, I love doing them actually, Richard, so thank you. So I am talking about this transmission cover. It's basically another engine breather system and the merits of it. So if you remember, let's get some background to this. If you remember a few months ago, or maybe even longer than that, I did a couple of videos on whether the engine breather system for the Harley Davidsons with the M8 engines was even worth it, really. And from my point of view, I'm talking about performance. Is there any real performance gain? Is there any noticeable difference in how the engine runs? You know, that kind of thing. But also it was to look at the engine itself and see if there's any noticeable difference in the amount of carbon deposits that you would see on the pistons. Okay, so you know, I made a whole series of videos of that, and then if you watch the channel further on, I made my own adaptation of the engine breathers tubes, rerouting those, and also I made an engine oil dipstick, or a vented dipstick as well. So this is now the next stage, if you will, or another equation to think about. What is the point of venting the engine? Well, let's just, I suppose we have to. I've done a bit of research, and I've watched quite a few videos now of other people talking about this, and some are really good experts, and some are, well, they're just, you know, average people, let's say, just talking about it. And I get emails about this all the time, and people asking me to comment on it, and I got one last night from Guy, and he was asking me about my thoughts on this situation as well. So I thought, well, I'd give it a go, and I'd you know, discuss it and see what the merits of it are. The engine crankcase pressure is what a lot of people seem to focus on, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to have any kind of pressure in there. Okay, so the M8 engines in particular, this is what I'm going to talk about, but you can talk about other Harley Davidson engines if you will, or think about it. This is the way I see it. The M8 engine already has an engine breather system, okay, and that's what vents out excessive crankcase pressure. Okay, whether it's effective or not is another story, but it relies on the engine breather system at the top of the engine. It's basically a labyrinth of little oil channels, let's say. So an air oil mix, if you will, can go through there. It will separate out the oil. The excessive air pressure is passed through an umbrella valve, and that goes then through the external breather tubing, and then passed and fed back into your throttle body. Okay, so if there is any air oil residue, it will go back into the cylinders. The problem with that many people will claim is actually that's going to reduce the efficiency of your throttle body, but also it's going to increase the carbon deposits on your piston. Right, okay. So I kind of discussed this, but this is all relevant. Now, why is this relevant in terms of engine performance, let's say, or engine efficiency? Well, actually, most of this has got to do with this, the interaction of the piston and the piston rings with the cylinder wall as well. So if the piston rings are not working correctly, you can have blow-by, which basically is, and blow-by can work in both ways, if you will. You can have any crankcase oil that can actually pass up past the pistons, piston rings, as you say. So there's excessive oil going through there, and that could be burning, you're burning oil. Or you can have the oil coming through the throttle body, let's say, the tiny amounts that create carbon deposits or excessive carbon deposits on the piston crown itself, and also on the cylinder walls, and that can add to the degradation of those piston rings. Therefore, you're going to have a transfer of air pressure from the top of the piston coming past the oil rings, the piston rings, or you can have oil going the other way. Either way, it's an inefficient engine. So what does the breather system do? It does, well, basically what it does, it just tends to relieve the crankcase buildup of pressure that any engine has. Now, what is the crankcase pressure in an engine, or a Harley Davidson engine? Well, I tried to look for a few figures, and there doesn't seem to be noted down exactly what these figures are, but we're kind of talking in the region of about 3 to 4 psi, which, now if you think about the standard atmosphere is about 14.69, 14.7 psi, pounds per square inch, which works out at 1 bar. It's 29.92 inches of mercury, 1013.2 hectopascals, if you want to talk in that. So there's lots of different measurement scales, but essentially it's 14.7, which equates to inches of mercury is 29. So you want something that's a little bit less than that in the crankcase. You want some kind of, I wouldn't say vacuum, just a reduced pressure, so that on the power stroke of the engine, when you get combustion, let's say, and that combustion is driving down the piston under high pressure, okay, it's driving down that piston, you want a reduced pressure beneath that piston in the crankcase, so that it's an easier motion, it's more efficient, there's less resistance. And that's why lots of people would say you want to have a negative pressure in the crankcase, okay? But one of the other issues, the byproduct of that, is that if you don't have a negative, or if you do have a negative pressure in there, and if it's too much, then that can affect the oil scavenging system. That can affect the upstroke of the piston as well. So there's pros and cons to this, having this negative pressure or vacuum state, let's say, within the crankcase. And at some parts of the engine cycle, or the combustion cycle, if you will, it's a good thing, and other parts it's not a great thing. But however, whatever the situation is, when you get a pressure build-up in this crankcase, because either a bit of blow-by, or there's going to be some kind of pressure build-up just from general leakage, what's going to happen is that has to vent out somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to have a constant build-up of pressure in there, and then your engine isn't going to work properly, and then you can start blowing oil seals and all that kind of stuff, and eventually you could end up breaking your engine. So that's why the breather system is there. That's why you know, engines have always had this system of one form or another. They've either had some kind of venting to the atmosphere, or now by emission standards you need to have it vented back into the engine. Okay, so why there's another system on the air on the engine that we have that is also related to this, and that's the ACRs. The ACRs are the automatic compression release, and basically when you start your engine, you're going to have a lot of pressure buildup within those cylinders, so you need some way to, just on that initial starting cycle, to relieve that pressure. So you've got these valves that open up that reduces the compression, so that as the engine is starting, the pistons can move a lot easier. So that's what the ACRs are there for. So it's a similar kind of thing. We need to relieve pressure or let pressure stabilize in one form or another. Okay, so you've already got the engine breathers that acts in this system, whether it works properly or not. And these umbrella valves that are in there, that I wouldn't say they're the most efficient, but also you've got to question over a long period of time, are they really going to work properly? Okay, the other question is then, do you want that oil going back into the throttle body? So many people don't want that because of the carbon buildup, so they say, right, okay, we're going to reroute that. Okay, so then you're going to have, you could potentially have, because of this pressure buildup in the crankcase, excessive oil just dripping out the side of your engine, okay, because of these externally vented breather tubes. So how do you do it? You put a catch can on it, right? So how can you reduce that even further and also let the crankcase pressure just equalize and be a little bit easier on that power stroke, that it's not going to have so much of an impact, a pressure resistance in the crankcase, where you can increase that that venting of the crankcase by having some kind of crankcase breather, or in the what we've been doing up until now is having the vented dipstick on the oil dipstick, the engine oil dipstick, right? Okay, so we'll get there in the end. Right, so you've got the engine oil vented dipstick, and if you watch my videos, just say you can either buy one or you can make your own, okay? And I've made my own, and it works fine. So what happens is, when you put that on there, you've got a tube as well, and it is a bit cumbersome. If you want to change, check your oil, you have to take the tube off and everything, and so it is cumbersome. I get that. But with that in place, there's natural venting now from your internal engine, as it were. So that means that actually when you're rolling on the throttle, the engine is allowed to spin up and spin down, or spool up and spool down, rev up, rev down, a lot freer. On that power stroke of the piston, there is less resistance, or as soon as it starts pushing down, there is less resistance, because there's air is allowed to escape, or pressure is allowed to escape a lot more freely, not just via the engine breather system, but also via your vented dipstick. So you're allowing that movement a little bit more, and I've certainly noticed that. Does it increase my performance? Does it make me go faster? No, I'm not saying that at all, but what I'm saying is there is a noticeable slight difference in the way the engine revs. Okay, the other benefit of this, having this extra venting system like a vented dipstick, is that actually it relieves the pressure that you're forcing up through the engine breather system, so that you're not forcing an air oil mix, let's say, through the labyrinth, up through the air umbrella valves, and then if you're going to vent it externally, you'll have it through the throttle body. Okay, so what that means is, well, actually, on my particular bike, I haven't got a catch can. I've literally got the engine breather tubes coming out, and they're resting behind the air filter housing, the air cleaner housing. No oil is coming out of there at all. I keep on checking it, and the reason is because I've got the vented dipstick, so all the pressure differential comes out of there, as opposed to most of it going out the top. So that's how you can actually prevent much of the oil, if there is any, coming up through the engine breather system and back into your throttle body. So the question is, do you need to have both the external engine breather system, rerouting, so you don't get it through the throttle body, and the vented oil dipstick? I would say Well, actually, on the basis of the evidence that I've seen myself off my own work, I would say no, you don't need to do both. I've done both, and most people would do both, but I don't think you really need to do it. Okay, so the other reason for this pressure build-up, let's say, is really down to, well, not the pressure build-up, but the reason why the pressure in the crankcase can cause a problem is down to this this wet sumping, this oil sumping that M8 engines and a lot of other engines can have as well. There is a very small, as I've reported in the past, there's a very small sump on the M8 engines, and basically because of the limitations of the oil pump, and especially in the scavenge system, and drawing the oil away from the crankcase in that case, what can happen? You can have a build-up of oil, and this is really on prolonged rides and everything. I haven't noticed it myself, and basically what you can have a decrease in engine performance, retarded acceleration, all that kind of stuff, because there's greater resistance within the crankcase as well. So if you've got less crankcase pressure as well, that can affect, or if you can have too much, or we have too much, well, it's going to be vented out. But if you've got too little, then that means that your scavenge system won't work properly either. So there are two schools of thought. Do you have the venting or not? Because you want to have that vacuum, or you don't want to have that vacuum, and it can affect lots of things in lots of different ways. I've got to say, on the evidence that I've seen, that I don't get any sumping. There isn't any sumping. I go on all sorts of different types of rides at different speeds, different RPMs as well. I don't tend to see any noticeable difference in the way the engines perform, the revving a little bit, as I said. There isn't any difference in carbon buildup either that I've noticed as well. So the venting from that point of view of the vented dipstick doesn't really make much difference, I would say. And then we're going to talk about, does it affect the sumping of the engine? Well, I think having some kind of venting does help that as well. So that kind of helps that situation. Now, bear this in mind. If you have any stage upgrades, the chances are you're going to be looking at like a stage 2 or a stage 3, stage 4. You will definitely need to put in an upgraded oil pump. You definitely will be looking at that anyway. Don't ever do a stage 2 or 3 or 4 without doing an engine oil pump upgrade. On the 2018, 2019 bikes, I think it was, they actually, for the bigger size engines, they actually changed the engine oil pump as well. But now part of the package for engine upgrades, we'll be looking at an increased engine oil pump efficiency, and most of that is in the scavenge system, so it takes away from this wet sumping or this oil sumping issue. Right. So that's that. Now, let's get on to what we're really going to be talking about here, is this transmission cover breather. Do you need to fit it? Well, if you've already got the vented dipstick and also you've got the external breathers rerouted, I really don't see the point in having this transmission cover breather, unless you just don't really like the vented dipstick and you just want to go back to a stock one, and you want to have this transmission cover instead. It does seem to be a much neater fit. It does seem to be a much neater way of doing it. Now, can you make one of these yourselves? Yeah, you basically take the transmission cover off. It's very awkward because you've got all the pins, and it's right beneath the behind the rear cylinder there. Don't be confused. There is another vent there on that transmission cover, and that is for the transmission itself. But as I say, there are two compartments. That cover covers two compartments: the transmission, which is open, and then you've got this kind of feed from the engine crankcase then to the engine oil reservoir, as it were. So there is a definite split in there. There's a definite, that's the transmission side, this is the engine side, if you will. So there is a vent on there for the transmission, and you might have seen it kind of sticks out the front of the transmission cover there. But on older bikes you may not have seen that. On new bikes it does. But anyway, so that is this transmission cover. You can buy it, and there's a company called Trask. They've developed this. I think I can't remember how much it is. I mean, it's quite expensive. It's $349.95. I have no idea what that is in terms of for Europe, how much it would be for Europe or how much it would be for the UK. I'm not even sure who's importing these right now, whether you'd have to just go direct from Trask. So if you're importing this from the US, then you're probably going to get stung for import taxes and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's a substantial amount. I mean, the Harley Davidson cover is a plastic cover with metal inserts, you know, for where the bolts go through, but this is all a metal, made of metal, so it's a lot sturdier stuff. And it's well, I'm just looking at the actual cover itself. Let me see if I can bring this up on here as well. I mean, it looks okay. I mean, it's billet aluminium. Let's say you've got a gloss black finish. Let me just see if I can bring this up for you guys here, just in case. Can I share my screen? Yeah. Share screen. Yeah. Hold on. Don't know why that's done that. No, the window. There we go. That's the window. That one. Share. Oh, for some reason it won't let me. Sorry, I can't show the screen. Anyway, there's something wrong with my system right now, but if I can do this for you, hold on. That's it on my other computer right there. There you go, that's it right there. I'm gonna have to sort that out. Sorry guys, I didn't realise I had a problem with this system here. But anyway, so this is what you know. It's quite an expensive thing to have on there, but you could take your existing transmission cover and you could just drill a hole, tap a hole through it, put a one-way valve in it, and then you could look at, you know, incorporating some kind of pressure relief valve on here. So the interesting thing for me is, what kind of pressures are we really talking about here? You know, what are we really talking about? Because the research that I've done, and there's a couple of good articles, a couple of good research articles here, which is really interesting as well. But you know, they're talking in the region of about 5 to 6 inches of mercury. Let me just let's do 5, which is about 2.5 to 3 psi, pounds per square inch. That's what they're looking at in terms of whether it's a positive gain or a negative gain of pressure. Lots of there are other engines. Now obviously every engine is going to be different, of course, but a lot of engines are going to be looking in the region, and I think it was, let me just see if it was here, just check my mass. It's what pressure is engine, yeah, so a lot of engines are working off in crankcase pressure 2.5 to 6 psi as well. If you take the atmospheric pressure, it's about 14.6, 14.69, 14.7. They're operating at a negative pressure, because that's going to help that downward stroke, isn't it? You've got a negative pressure, that's got that downward stroke. But essentially, if you can vent that out even more, then whatever pressure resistance it meets, that's going to be vented out as soon as it pushes down. So that's why you've got that kind of venting out. It helps down on the power stroke, increases its efficiency. But if you can actually make that even more, let's say, but the problem is on the upstroke there is less positive pressure in the crankcase, that's going to push it all out. However, if you're also thinking, well, this is an open vent, if an open vent as opposed to a valved vent, then that airflow is going to come in and go out, come in and go out. So you're going to have a lot of an easier movement of the pistons rather than having a pressure relief valve. But let's just say you put in a pressure relief valve there on the transmission cover. That is gonna, you can buy different pressure relief valves, and you can have a variable pressure relief valve where you can either set it to the lower figure, let's say 2 psi, or up to a higher figure, let's say 6 psi, and you can change your crankcase pressure setting by that method. But I still come back to this same thing, guys, the same thing. Is it really worth it? Is it really going to make that much difference? You know, you've already got your vented oil dipstick. Okay, get rid of your vented oils dipstick, go back to the stock one, and just put this transmission cover in place. Again, it's a big expense, but how much do you really need it? So let's just say if you've got oil sumping, or you believe you've got oil sumping, well, before putting this in, I would look at an engine oil pump change, or engine oil pump upgrade, rather than doing this. Don't look at this as your solution to all your problems. Look at an engine oil pump change. You know, speak to your dealership or speak to whoever does your work for you, or if you do it yourself, you know, look for an upgrade. Go to the aftermarket. You know, they've probably got better ones out there as well, and look at those, because I think if you're looking at a sumping issue, then it's your scavenge system, the way the oil is taken away from the engine, that's going to be the problem. And if your oil pump isn't up to it, or there isn't enough oil that's being sent back to the reservoir, then to give a positive pressure to the oil pump itself, then you're going to have oil starvation within your system, and then you'll overcook your engine, and basically you're going to screw up your engine as well. So having the oil pump is going to be the key here. That's going to be the key to sorting out a lot of these issues, as we already know. So they've already upgraded these, and the bigger engines, they've already changed a lot of those oil pumps, as we know. And if you upgrade your engine or upstage your engine, then you're going to have to change that oil pump as well anyway, because you're demanding a lot more from your bike, a lot more the performance as well. Obviously, it really depends how you ride your bike as well. If you ride it hard, long distances as well, you're probably going to notice this oil sumping a lot more than if you're just cruising around shorter distances, let's say. You know, so these are you know, things to consider. But will this transmission cover, vented cover, work? Well, it will work in terms of relieving that pressure from the crankcase. Is it a better system than the vented oil dipstick, whether you make it yourself or whether you buy it from fueling, let's say? I'm not sure if it's a better system. I think it works in exactly the same way. Should you have the vented dipstick and your external engine breathers, and also this vented transmission cover? Personally, I would say no. I would say no, because you don't want to have, or do you want to have a lot of venting, over venting the crankcase? I would say not. I would say just a bit of back pressure there is probably going to be a good thing. So I would say either have one or the other, but don't have both. You don't need to have both on the bike. If you're asking me which is possibly the cleaner look, then definitely go for the transmission cover, the Trask transmission cover, because it's all hidden behind there. You can hide the tubing a little bit, and you're never going to need to see it. Basically, you're just going to see that it's going to be there, and away you go. Could you make something yourself for really cheap? Yeah, I'm sure you could. You know, just get a tap, a valve there, maybe pressure relief valve, or not even have a valve in there at all, just have it free flowing, you know, with a bit of tubing, whatever. I mean, I've got to say, some people are saying that the vented oil dipstick, you know, if you're riding it hard, then oil starts spurting out all over the place as well. Well, I think a lot of this is down to how you have your vented oil dipstick as well. Okay, because the vented oil dipstick, you've got to have a barrier in there. You've got to have a pressure, not pressure, an oil trap, as it were. So the vented oil dipstick that I've got, if you've seen the videos that I made as well, I actually put sponge in there as well. So the oil is caught. The oil is, or the majority of oil is caught by the sponge before it comes out of the tubing. The tubing comes all the way at the top of the bike. And it just sits on near the battery compartment, or just at the top of the rear fender. And I've got an oil filter right there as well. It's an open line. It's not valved or anything like that. So the oil doesn't come out for me, and it hardly even travels up the oil line. There's nothing coming out in the oil catch can filter, which I've got up there. So I think lots of people are having problems with the vented dipstick, or one that they've made themselves, because they're not putting any kind of baffle in there to catch the oil. Just as in the engine breather system at the top of the engine, it goes through a labyrinth of channels, so it flings out the oil away from the air, so that most of it doesn't come out of the engine breather tubes back into the throttle body. So it's exactly the same here. So I've got no problems with my vented dipstick. Does it make much difference in terms of overall performance? No. I mean, would I see it as the fix for all the issues in terms of oil issues? No, I would go for an engine oil pump upgrade if I was actually going to do substantial upstaging on the engine. Would I necessarily swap it out just to go and spend another $350 or whatever it is, plus import taxes, plus shipping, whatever it is, for this transmission vented cover? No, I wouldn't. I'll just stay as you are. Would I modify a transmission cover, to achieve the same results? Well, I think now I'm at the stage where I'd just be creating work for myself, which I don't really need to do. But if I hadn't done the vented oil dipstick, would I do the cover instead? Yes, I probably would actually. I probably would. I'd probably go for the cover, the transmission cover, instead of the oil dipstick, because it's just a cleaner look, and it's easier to change or check the oil from the oil dipstick without having to remove an oil pipe, as it were. So those are the merits. Those are the merits of it. I would say that there's definitely ways to do it. There's definitely ways to do it a lot cheaply. If that's, I mean, from my point of view, the interest would be to try and achieve this in the right way. The other thing is, to see exactly what the engine crankcase pressures are on the M8 engines. Is it only about 2 to 6 psi, or is it substantially more or substantially less? I mean, obviously there's going to be fluctuation there. There's going to be a variation, and you're never going to be able to maintain a full vacuum on an engine. It just doesn't work. When your engine is at idle, let's say, not idle, when it's switched off, well, then pressure will equalize in it. So you're going to start off with atmospheric pressure in the engine initially. If you've left your engine for a period of time, that is, it will have atmospheric pressure in there. But once you've started up, then obviously you're going to have a bit of pressure relief from there, and then you're also going to have some kind of pressure drop in there as well. But here's the thing, that's the reason why, again, why you have the ACRs as well. There's a compression relief valves for starting, because you need to overcome that atmospheric pressure buildup in the crankcase, and also within the pistons, within the cylinders as well, so the engine turns over a lot easier. So so that's something to consider. But anyway, look, these are it's an interesting point thing. I mean, I didn't really want to make this too technical, this live stream, but it's an interesting one, because lots of people keep on sending me emails about this and saying, would I do it, what are the benefits of it? I think the benefits are exactly the same whether you believe them or not, of exactly the same as the vented dipstick. Is it probably a better way to do it? Is it a better channel to do it? Is it a more cleaner look? Possibly, because it's out of sight, you know, it's out of view a little bit. I personally don't like to see catch cans or oil filters, tubing or anything like that. That's why the reason I've gone for my system. I've gone for the external breather tubing rerouting. There's no oil coming out of those because I've got the vented dipstick. Even when I you know, roll on the throttle a lot for a substantial amount of time, there isn't any oil coming out of there. I'm not getting engine oil sumping, and never had anyway. So, you know, it's you know, and most Softails are not really getting that. This is more of a tourer issue, or it has been historically, than the Softail issue as well. And there is a slight difference in the sump size of the touring engines rather than the Softail engines as well. So it's, you know, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one, how much you put faith in this, or how much credence you put into this, how much benefit this will give you. I think you're spending a lot of money on a component that looks nice, that might be a nicer look, but I'm not necessarily sure how much extra benefit you're going to get out of it. That, you know, and I suppose it really depends. What are you trying to solve? What point or what problem are you trying to solve? If you don't have a problem with, you know, excessive oil coming out of your engine breather system, let's say, and going into your throttle body, or you don't have a oil sumping issue, or you don't have you know, an issue with your motorcycle revving, or you don't have a problem with it starting and all that kind of stuff, then I'm not really sure why you were doing this. Is it purely just an academic thing? Is it just to say, right, this is going to help my engine breathe a little bit better, so therefore, okay, yeah, I can buy that, I can understand that on paper why you would do that. But are they going to be dramatic changes? No, there aren't going to be dramatic changes unless you do other performance upgrades as well, of course. And the performance upgrades, that's the ones that you're going to really notice the big difference. But pound for pound, doing something like this, actually, especially if you do the modification yourself and not buy the component from Trask or from Fueling, whatever, you make your own vented dipstick, or you make your own vented transmission cover, I think that's where you're going to get the best pound for pound or dollar for dollar benefit, performance benefit, because you're going to see, you know, you're going to see that reduction in the or better equalization of crankcase pressure, which is going to help you know, lots of things. But I wouldn't rush out and spend all your money on this. I think there are other things that you can spend money on. I say, if you've got oiling issues, then I would upgrade your oil pump as one of the first things to do. If you're doing a cam change, let's say, or a cam plate change, I don't know what advice you would get from dealerships or mechanics. But if I was doing that, or looking at doing that, I would do the oil pump. Now, you'll have to forgive me, but I think certain kits do include an oil pump as well, oil pump upgrade as well. So you can already do that. You can already, you know, go for a cam change, whatever it is, whichever one you want to choose. You get the cam plate as well, but you'll also get the upgraded oil pump as well as part of that kit. That's the kit you want to go for. You want to go for the oil pump change. And, you know, I wouldn't be looking at these crankcase pressure fixes, let's say, if that crankcase pressure that you have isn't really an issue, okay? Because the stock engines do have crankcase venting already. It might not be enough, it might not be reliable in the long term, but that's what the engine breathers are there for. The engine breathers are there to relieve that pressure differential one way, or if it's too much of a pressure buildup, it builds up. What is that crankcase pressure? 2.5 to 6 psi, something like that. What do those little umbrella valves work off? Probably about I don't know, if you've got crankcase pressure of 2.5 to 6 psi, they're probably looking at 4 or 5 psi, something like that. I don't know. I don't actually have a lot of data on that to be able to tell you, really. You know, but if you've got a vented dipstick or a vented crank transmission cover, then you're going to definitely have that pressure differential that is going to be able to equalize a lot easier. Now, do you, as I say, do you have it as an open line, as an open vent, or do you have it as a one-way relief valve? Again, that's, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say. Put it this way: the engine breather system is a one-way valve. It's an umbrella valve. It's not a great, you know, very efficient, but it's, you know, it pops up. Pressure, you know, comes out, maybe a bit of oil comes out, and then it drops back down, closing the valve. So no air should go back into the engine that way. The crankcase buildup will either be from blow by of the pistons, or it's coming from the general leakage within the engine system itself. It's not going to be necessarily coming in through the breathers. So you could argue that actually you do need to have a one-way valve on your transmission cover vent, or also on your fuel vent, fuel cap vent as well, because, you know, if you are going to have, you don't want pressure or air to go back in, or any contaminants to go back in. But at the same time, if it's allowed to vent in and vent out, then again, you've got easier pressure equalization, or pressure movement, pressure gradients, to be able to go up and go down a lot more freely without valves. And the reason why you'd have valves is that it's basically to control that, but also to stop anything to go back in. So if you're not worried about anything going back in, and you've rerouted your tubing away from the atmosphere, let's say, and you're away from any contaminants that can come back in, like I've got mine on my vented dipstick, it's beneath the seat, so it's out of sight, out of mind. You should have a problem at all. So I would have it as an open line out there. Make sure it's away from the elements, and away you go. Right, so there we go. That's my thoughts on the vented transmission cover. As, you know, just to recap, I think if you've got the vented oil dipstick, you don't need this transmission cover. It would be, or this vented transmission cover, it would be either or for me. Either or. Why are people getting oil coming out of their oil lines, let's say, or out of their vented dipstick? It's because I don't know this for a fact, but I think they haven't got any kind of baffle to catch the oil. I think they've just drilled a hole through the dipstick and it's an open flow channel of oil coming out, and I mean, it could be the case. And that's one of my model Mark 1, if you will. That's exactly what happened to me. I had oil gushing out because there wasn't any kind of baffle in there. Well, as soon as I put the sponge in there to catch the oil, but still let air come through, not a problem. That sorted all that out. But you say it'll be either or for me. You know, I've gone on for about nearly 45 minutes on this. It'll be either or, whether it's the vented dipstick or the vented transmission cover. The vented transmission cover, I'd say, is a cleaner look. It's a better look, for want of a better word. But they, you know, whether you go for if you're going to buy this as opposed to making this yourself, they are still expensive propositions. I would look at either making it yourself for a few dollars here. I mean, that's all it's going to take, a few dollars, or I wouldn't even bother. I wouldn't even bother if it's that much of an issue. If you're concerned about engine oil sumping, and this is not really your fix for it, your big fix is to get an oil pump change. That's what I would say. But, you know, then you could have these as an addition, as an add-on to anything else that you do as well. But anyway, listen, I hope you found that useful. So I do get a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of emails about it. Recently, I've been getting emails about this, or questions that have come through via the website as well about, you know, crankcase breathers or different types of breather systems, and obviously this transmission cover breather system. Is it going to make any real difference as well? And I think it's so hard to know or to be able to say the definitive truth on this, or the definitive answer which is going to give you either a positive or a negative, because it really depends on what cycle of the engine rotation are we talking about, and also what is the net gain. And I talked about this one of the engine breathers as well, and also the vented dipstick. What's the net gain? What's the performance gain? Are we talking it's so marginal that you're not even going to notice? Or are we talking about the longevity of the engine? Are we going to say that instead of 20, 30 years your engine will last, it's going to actually last 29 years and 11 months and 25 days or something? So that, again, without any real evidence, without any real proof, a lot of this is just anecdotal. A lot of this is how we feel about it, so. But anyway, sorry, I've ignored the comments, so I'll quickly dip into those. Richard, I only know the basics on engines. Do they call it a hydro lock? And then can this happen? Hydro lock's slightly different, but essentially, as I said, it's that pressure differential that if you've got excessive pressure in the crankcase, this is why you've got the venting, so that on the power stroke going down, when the piston's force down, there's less resistance there. Essentially, that's what you want the venting there for. Therefore, you're going to have less oil blowing back up through, and then on that pressure, on that power stroke as well, you've got less gas bypassing or blowing by the pistons as well. But obviously, this all depends on. All of this all depends on if you've got good pistons, good piston rings, and good cylinders as well. And talks of, they're not scored or anything like that, Saddlebag, you've got it right, thank you. If you put a one-way valve, you create a vacuum in the case. Yeah, that could create problems. Better to put a filter on the end of the line and to keep contaminants going in. Yeah, exactly right. I say, I would have it as an open line with some kind of filter on the end of it. Keep it away from the elements as well. Don't have it hanging on the underside of the bike or anything like that. Just, keep it away from the elements, and away we go. Said about the 2020 HD Taurus come with a transmission vent, and all HDs all my direction went away. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that was for the Taurus, wasn't it? Yeah, not the Softails. Softails didn't really have that issue. Different setup as well. So. Anyway, right, hope you found that useful. As I say, sorry I couldn't get the screen up on here. I'm gonna have to investigate now why it wouldn't let me do that. It's a bit of an odd thing, but anyway, so if you're interested, it's Trask Performance, are they? What are they called? Trask, hold on, they are Trask Performance. There we go, traskperformance.com. And they've got it. I'm sure there's other companies out there. I just haven't found them or looked at them. If you're asking me, would I spend $340 to $350 on that part, or would I make one myself? I would lean towards making one myself. But you know what? That's just me. But it does look like a really nice part. It's aluminium, gloss black. It looks really nice. So, if you're looking for a look as opposed to a more look over function, or look and function over just function, I would say, yeah, go for that. Spend your money on that. It will look better. Same with the fueling dipstick. If you're not worried about the money, but you prefer the look of it, yeah, go for that instead of your homemade one, of course. But again, now that's up to you. Personally, I don't really mind having something that doesn't look so great, as long as it functions. That's what I'm really looking at for. Anyway, right, well, I hope you found that useful, and I've got another live show coming next week, or in a few days as well, maybe tomorrow as well, but I'll catch you again. Thanks for that. Any questions or whatever, leave in the comments below. Catch you again.